Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started if we can. I'm Paul Pribenow, the president here at Augsburg University, and it's my great privilege to welcome you to the 8th Harry Emerson Fosdick Lecture on Preaching. I've had the great privilege to be here at Augsburg for the past 19 years, and so I've had a chance to hear each of our distinguished guests who've come and shared with us their own vision for what it means to preach the gospel in the world, and we're so grateful today to have the Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis from right here in Minneapolis with us to share his wisdom. I wanted to say a quick word about this effort, which I think, as many of you know, was really launched through the advocacy of the Reverend Greg Renstrom, who has a deep love and affection for what Dr. Fosdick did in his preaching and in his leadership in the church and the academy. And Greg has been such a force to make sure that this continues. Unfortunately, Greg's health is at a point now where he's not able to join us today. I'm hoping he's on the live stream so that he can also enjoy the fruits of his good work over the many years. Before we introduce Dr. Davis, I want to just offer a quick word. In the same way that Harry Emerson Fosdick was a leading light in the church and in public in the early part of the 20th century, there was another man who was a leading light in the last half of the 20th century, and that is Dr. Martin Marty. Many of you know that Dr. Marty passed away a couple of weeks ago at the age of 97. Dr. Marty was my teacher. I am one of the 128 students on a card in his wallet whose dissertations he advised. And it was my great privilege over many years to be his friend and to have him as my mentor. And I think for those of us who knew Marty, it was kind of remarkable to think about his scholarship, his teaching, his public intellectual work, and yet also to know him as a family man, as a church man, as he always knew the names of my kids. He always asked about them. But perhaps most relevant to this moment we find ourselves in is that Marty, for his entire career, believed deeply in the pluralism at the heart of our life together. And he celebrated that pluralism, yes, in religion, but also in culture, in public life. And if we need anything more than anything else right this moment in our life, I think we need a commitment to that sense of pluralism, to the sense that there is good and that we are made better by the fact that we come from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, and that only together can we go forward. So we lift up Mr. Marty. There will be a service for him here in Minneapolis on March 29th at Central Lutheran Church, so watch for news of that, but seemed appropriate to lift him up today and to remember my good friend. I now ask Pastor Babette Chapman if she'll come forward to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this amazing day. And so I confess at Reverend Dr. Davis, I was like, how do you want me to introduce you? And he said, oh, honey, you just do, and so I'm going to do me. Is that okay? I'm going to do me. So Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis was born in the Mississippi Delta, the 15th child of former sharecroppers, and has maintained a lifelong commitment to justice, safety, and love. His father only achieved a 6th grade education, but his parents were able to send all their children to college. DeWayne is currently the lead minister of Plymouth Congregational Church of Minneapolis and recently served as the chaplain of the Minnesota State Senate. Before being ordained for the ministry in 2012, he worked as a congressional staffer on healthcare, housing, transit and transportation, reproductive justice, civil rights, voting rights, and small business development, among many other issues. Imagine how things have changed in less than 40 days. Throughout his career, DeWayne has pursued justice in everything he does. And I'm gonna stop there. You could Google him. I will say that, he's a candidate for the mayor of Minneapolis. Just something to consider if you're, Minnesotan. I'm just saying. But what I would like to do is when we we're imagining who might speak to us this year, DeWayne was at the top of the list, and we thought certainly he would not be available. And his yes was so quick, we knew the presence of the Lord, right, was in this day and in this time, because God is always ahead and knows our theme this year is what you need is here. And so what we needed for this season is a word on how to preach in such a time. And so I'm just going to go ahead and invite Dr. Davis up. Let's
Thank you, Beth. I really appreciate that. And you were right, my answer was quick, largely because for those who know me, preaching matters. And I think when you made the offer, I was teaching at United. I teach the preaching course there. I think I had been in high dudgeon that day about the importance of this kind of discourse in a time when our discourse has become coarsened. And so the idea of preaching now, when our language has been coarsened and debased and is loaded with so much untruth, it just needs more of us who have operated in good faith to try to say what thus saith the Lord. I thank you, thank you, Augsburg. Thank you for this great honor. Thank you, Babette. Thank you, John. Thank you, Janet. All of who's helped make this happen. I really do appreciate it. I see Barbara back there. And now I feel really caught, because I hope I can say something that so wonderful pioneer in this work will find appropriate. I do want to start it off with the prayer. Merciful and gracious one, thank you. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for hallowing it even before we arrived. And so now make it your moment. Say something that your people will hear. Endow us with wisdom, wisdom from on high, wisdom that we may not even know that we have access to, wisdom that will change us. Amen. I thought I was being clever when I came up with the title, Shall Untruth Win? But as I begin to think about how to begin this, it became less amusing. Truth has always been contested, but on January 20th, 2017, the most vocal public challenge to the truth came when a newly inaugurated president's press secretary claimed, after we had all seen it, claimed that the president had, quote, the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period. And when the president's aide was later challenged on the claim, another aide was challenged on that claim, she answered that the press secretary was providing, quote, alternative facts. And boy, we got a kick out of it. I laughed. Journalists, pundits, comedians, and everyday Americans got a kick out of making fun of this oxymoronic phrase. It seemed as if that it would just bear in the light of day that they were playing with truth, that they were, dare I say it, lying. But little did we know that it would become the beginning of a bewildering time of what the literary critic Michiko Kakitani calls our new post-truth lexicon. Imagine that. That cultural critics now have named our age, named discourse, with something called post-truth lexicon. Joining alternative facts are others that have become sadly familiar. Fake news, truth decay, or even the one more humorous one, truthiness. The philosopher Mark Lilla has lamented that we live in a time when the denial of evident truth is gaining the upper hand. And it isn't as if though people aren't aware that it is occurring, because if you look around, George Orwell's 1984, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, and the works of Hannah Arendt are all now topping the bestseller lists once again. People are, in some sense, aware that we are abounding in a post-truth era. Oh, even Arendt, you can now go through social media and see quotes, which, I often sort of shrink with those quotes, take it out of context, but every context seems the context. Arendt warned of the dangers of lying and the creation of what she called a defactualized world. Now, even when she used that word, that phrase, defactualized word, she was naming a specific time and a specific people. She was talking about Presidents Johnson and Nixon, that they got themselves wrapped up in the Vietnam War because they had defactualized everything that was happening in service to another goal. She in no way thought that our entire culture, our entire politics, our entire economy would become intentionally, by everybody, defactualized. We now seem to inhabit something that Hannah Arendt said that now is a little bit more disturbing. She said, the result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truth is not that lies will now be accepted as truth and the truth be defamed as lies, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world and the category of truth versus falsehood is among the mental means to this end. That which we take our bearings in the real world is being destroyed. Our bearings in the real world, how we look around and determine what is and move about in it with the same understanding or a consensus understanding, it is being destroyed. She's talking about our very idea of what it means to understand meaning and participation and movement in the world. What happens to our ability to speak to one another when that sense of the world has been destroyed? And then we have to preach. People who come wanting to hear a word from the Lord. People wanting to find some way to make meaning out of the unmeaning. People wanting to see themselves in the larger scheme of things. Come to hear preachers say something. Oh, people of faith and readers of the Bible may recall the pointed question Roman Procurator Pontius Pilate asked Jesus when the authorities brought Jesus before him to be tried. What is truth? Pilate asked. Oh, irony abounds. For the evangelist of John has established that Jesus was the truth, standing in a trial orchestrated not to ascertain truth, but for the other more mundane reasons that humans put Peter up for trial, for other reasons. But the world that we are inhabiting now is like that trial. We step forth to claim something, assuming that we're being understood. And every response is no, I agree or disagree. Every response is not, oh, say more. Every response is not, oh, I hear you. Every response, oh, I disagree. But the response is, what is truth? Is there truth? How do we speak in that world? For those of us who dare to say what thus saith the Lord, who accept that God seeks to reveal God's self even in contingent and compromised human speech, who believe that preaching matters and remains a critical means by which we help people make meaning, we cannot effectively proclaim anything without confronting the rise of untruth. It may mean one more day in sermon preparation. Oh, my students hate to hear that. One more day, one more hour of simply trying to ascertain truth from falsehood. When you've never had to do it that way before, to anticipate that the people who might be sitting before us simply have given up on the belief that there is an apprehendable or ascertainable or discoverable truth at all. Can good news penetrate the noise of propaganda and conspiracy in our national discourse? Can a word of hope break through the cynicism and nihilism of cruel and radicalized politics? Now we have a new, more critical task before us. And it goes well beyond our exegesis or the sermon form, or even the way you show up in the pulpit. All those things are important, but the question remains, of what use are they if, as Hannah Arendt said, the very real sense of our being in the world is destroyed? On May 21st, 1922, when Harry Emerson Fosdick approached the sacred desk of the First Presbyterian Church in the West Village of Manhattan to deliver his most famous sermon, Shall the Fundamentalist Win?, the city and the nation, the world, were all experiencing rapid, disorienting change. On the surface, music was different and more freewheeling. And if you walked by one of those halls where the speakers were popping out jazz, if you peeked in, you might see men and women dancing so close together that the Holy Spirit has no room. Cultural mores had shifted far from the carefully prescribed gender roles of the previous Gilded Age, in the types of clothing people wore, in the interactions of people of different races, different sexes, different experiences. It was all so very different and new and frightening. And in the aftermath of the flu epidemic just a few years earlier in 1918, scientists had discovered vitamins, developed insulin and penicillin, and were making breakthroughs in vaccine development. And on the more tragic side of all those discoveries was that meant that people had access now to opiates and other addictive drugs. So we began to see the kind of people on the streets that we didn't quite see before. The Progressive Era ushered in a push for modernization, using new scientific, medical, engineering discoveries and solutions to business and government. So you see a massive expansion of corporations, even from the Gilded Age. And you see government getting larger, doing many things. And even just one interesting indication of the latest technology coming onto the world, just maybe 2 or 3 days before Fosdick gave that sermon, the United States was abuzz because Warren G. Harding became the first U.S. president to be heard on the radio. Oh, it was happening so fast. But Fosdick did not see these changes and developments as things to be afraid of. He did not see them as somehow challenging the great truths of the Bible or of the tradition. He believed that religion should respond and engage with the changing times, that actually this was an opportunity for the church to embark on an adventure to discover greater truth. And in that famous sermon, Fosdick wanted to give voice to the idea that truth continues to be discernible and apprehendable and reachable, even in our limited knowledge now. Even if that truth challenges the given truth, the great truths of the Bible and of the religious tradition. So in that famous sermon, Fosdick had to respond to the challenge and the relentless campaign against modernism by the fundamentalists. And I want to put a face on the fundamentalists. Sometimes we luxuriate in this wonderful, famous sermon that continues with us. But if there was one face of fundamentalists at that time, and probably the real person to whom Fosdick was responding was the Reverend John Roach Straton, who we might have some characters in our present time that might sound familiar. Nativist, anti-everything, truly the one who embraced the word fundamentalist when others thought it might have been a pejorative. Straton was the one who said, "I am, and I'm proud to be." Reverend John Roach Straton embraced that label wholeheartedly, characterizing fundamentalists as, quote, simply old-fashioned believers in the Bible, the great truths that it teaches, and the divine Christ it enshrines. But embracing the cause of fundamentalism, Straton also took as his project to delegitimize liberal Protestantism, which he genuinely feared was subverting and perverting Christianity. Conservative fundamentalists led by Reverend Straton routinely attacked Fosdick by name. Routinely attacked him by name. And so while I'm sure that Reverend Fosdick was really attempting to really proclaim a truth here, I know some part of him wanted to answer the people, answer the ones who were attacking him about being modernist. By the way, Fosdick did not shy away from the term modernist either. Hence the ensuing battle known as the fundamentalist modernist controversy, a battle over the contested truths of faith. Notice that I say it was contested truth. Contested truth. It's important for us to get that clear sense because it will distinguish from what I'm talking about when I say untruth. Contested truth. You see, because both Straton and Fosdick did not deny that there was a truth to be known. They did not deny that there was a way, there was something out there that we were all reaching, that we all wanted to grasp. They did not deny that there was a truth of God. They simply had contested claims about it. They did not feel the need, even in the midst of invective and insult, to spread misinformation or disinformation, or to deny that there was information to share, or to lie, or to use lying. Certainly, when it came to theological and biblical claims, they were debating and fighting over what the fundamentalists considered the fundamentals of Christianity. The inerrancy of the Bible, the imminent second coming of Jesus, the virgin birth, the bodily resurrection, and substitutionary atonement. They were fighting over the Bible. They were fighting over where the Bible will be in this experiment. They were fighting over who would win. But truth was still discernible, apprehendable, attainable. 3 years before the fundamentalist modernist controversy broke out into the world in the famous Scopes monkey trial, where William Jennings Bryan and the great Clarence Darrow went to court to battle over the teaching of evolution, the preachers, Fosdick and Straton, I said preachers, the preachers were holding forth on whether biblical and scientific truth could abide at the same time. I think it's important to remember that. It was the preachers who were leading discussion of whether theological and scientific truths can exist at the same time, that they could abide one another. Even before we got to the politics, even before we got to the trial of the century, the preachers, yes, preachers, I keep saying the preachers because I want you to hear about preaching and preachers and discourse in the world. Not to mention that each of these preachers had their sermons published in papers, in the newspapers every week. Everyone wanted to hear what the preachers thought. Oh, what a world that must have been. But in this debate, the value of truth remained front and center. Yes, they wanted to win, but they wanted to do it with the truth. They wanted to do it with the truth. And so I do want to just go a little bit deeper here in this debate, because it'll give us some sense of what we are up against in our current time. You see, I really wrestle with this because I'm a philosophy minor, and I am not going to talk about Aristotle. I'm not going to talk about any of the philosophers here. But let me just give you the shorthand, because I think both of these preachers, they exemplify the shorthand. So Straton could be said to have had a coherence view of the truth. His worldview was formed by a reading of the Bible and adherence to the great creedal traditions of the faith. For him, any understanding of the world that coheres to that biblical, theological, and creedal construct is the truth. And so the second coming of Jesus Christ is indeed a truth that we as the church should prepare for. That we wouldn't even be here had that not been that bodily resurrection. Everything has to cohere with that worldview for Straighten. And that is the truth he was willing to die upon. According to Straighten, quote, above every need of this age is the need of the vision of a great and holy God, high and lifted up, ruling in majesty and power upon the throne of the universe and reigning supreme among the affairs of men. No science can do that. No new discovery can overwhelm this truth. So anything else you do in the world has to cohere there. If it does not, it is not of God. Fosdick can be said to hold a correspondence view of the truth. The Bible and the great traditions of the faith are valuable gifts for living a Christian life. And that Christian life can withstand or accommodate observable and logical propositions that do not conform to ancient biblical understandings. And when what we have received from our tradition does not correspond to what we can see and conclude through reason and observation, then we can adjust our understanding without losing or rejecting our faith. According to Fosdick, quote, we must be able to think our modern life clear through in Christian terms. And to do that, we also must be able to think our Christian life clear through modern terms. Both holding on that there is a truth that is attainable, apprehendable, and discernible. So the battle is joined. But the historian Wallace Best said, the reason we don't hold fast to those categories as strictly today is because each of the combatants in the fundamentalist modernist fight have taken on some of the beliefs of the others. They've accepted some truths from one to the other. That is an indication that the truth was contested, not denied. That neither thought that their project would be advanced by an appeal to untruth. Neither thought that it didn't matter, their claims. Oh, don't get me wrong, they said some horrible things about each other. But truth was not sacrificed. But I also think we misread Fosdick's purpose in Shall the Fundamentalists Win if we believe it was an effort at quick dispatch of the fundamentalist approach. Oh, he did a wonderful, masterful job of challenging things that cannot be verifiable or falsifiable by modern scientific techniques. But for a long time, though, I assumed that the famous sermon stood the test of time because it was such an elegant takedown of the fundamentalist position, which is quite helpful for the progressive Christian assertion for its place in religious thought. But a closer read of the sermon offers a powerful strategy for preaching in the age of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. Yes, while early in his sermon, Fosdick expressed his concern that the fundamentalist approach was, quote, illiberal and intolerant. As he continued on, we see that his project was not to defeat the fundamentalists so much as a pleading with them, quote, the cause of magnanimity and liberality and tolerance of spirit, and for an intellectually hospitable, tolerant, liberty-loving church. Those are not the words of a preacher who assumes that truth is so narrow that he must use and manipulate words to make his case and win. This is a magnanimous approach. Fosdick asks, has anybody the right, in this sermon, by the way, has anybody the right to deny the Christian name to those who differ with him in such points and to shut against them the doors of Christian fellowship? But Fosdick also evinced humility, the humility that we should all possess when we are confronted with contested truth. He says it this way: there are many opinions in the field of modern controversy concerning which I am not sure whether they are right or wrong, but there is one thing I am sure of. Courtesy and kindness and tolerance and humility and fairness are right. Opinions may be mistaken. Love never is. So faced with the contestation of truth that threatened to damage the Christian church irreparably, in the face of being called socialist and communist simply because he embraced the scientific discoveries of their age and saw that truth, that scientific truth, was an adventure that even religious folks could take, Fosdick chose to proclaim a larger truth, the truth of love. The truth of love. What do we do when the truth is not just contested, but is also denied? We have the challenge now of preaching at a time where truth is denied. We have a challenge now where lying has become an acceptable part of the discourse in politics, journalism, economics, and I am afraid to say, faith. We have now the challenge of trying to say what thus saith the Lord to people who do not necessarily believe or imagine the world according to the biblical narrative we have accepted as a part of our faith expression. We are preaching to people exposed to a never-ending stream of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda, claims from nefarious actors sowing discords, claims from well-meaning but misinformed people who just simply have the freedom to take to social media and say whatever. And the veracity is affirmed only by the number of clicks. Claims from authority figures that we have to listen to, but we have long since stopped trusting, assuming that they are going to lie, such that even when they dare utter the truth, we do not for 1 minute believe what they say. We are preaching to people who have carved out new identities in that social media landscape, who, when they do make any kind of claim, bear no consequence for it being wrong or dangerous, or threatening, or destructive. And yet, these same people, those who cannot imagine or intellectually assent to the biblical and theological claims that underpin our proclamation, are nonetheless still God's beloved, seeking desperately to make meaning. Hoping in their desperation, even when they can't be honest about it, that they are looking for, dare I say it, some truth, some word, some opening, some breaking in the morass, some breakthrough, something, dare I call it again, good news. They still crave a meaningful word that counters the prevailing sense of uncertainty, isolation, loneliness, and certainly the mistrust. I'm watching my time. And you may remember them from last year's election. They were the people who annoyed some of us with their talk of being undecided in their vote for president. They were the people who articulated without irony or awareness demonstrably false information. They were the people who were so quickly enlisted to scapegoat the immigrant or our transgender siblings or any other that would just take the attention off them or just make them feel better about themselves. They were the people who accepted the narrative of stagnation and unresponsiveness when any of them did not feel the impact of the economic situation, whether it be inflation or unemployment. However, many of these people also hunger for truth. Oh, you say, preacher, how do you know they hunger for truth? Because we are created to be together, to be connected, to be in communion. We are created for it. They are looking for truth. And now, they are getting a stark lesson that the ideological claims of white nationalism or Christian hegemony or the unitary executive or the dangers of DEI and critical race theory are less truth claims than they are the stalking horses for a much more cynical goal of competitive authoritarianism that is protecting the interest of the wealthiest people in the world. And that makes them even more mistrustful. And that mistrust and disinformation is now a tool to keep them angry, unfocused, distracted, and demobilized. What will we say to them? What will we say that they can hear? What could we say that they will give us an audience? Oh, I know our nation and our leaders have always selectively used untruth, deploying language that protects our innocence and our narrow interests. They have also privileged exceptionalist narratives that make us look more noble and democratic than we actually are or historically have been. This has created and reinforced constructs of threat, of inferiority, and meritocracy that maintain the power dynamics of the prevailing order. And unfortunately, there is, and we have to contend with, that American Christianity has played a big role in that project, a critical role in that project. And so we come to the pulpit as mistrusted as lawyers. Sorry, lawyers. As mistrusted as the politicians. But do we have something to say? You know, while I have intentionally avoided assessing whether Fosdick successfully dispatched fundamentalism and that the modernists won the day, looking at fundamentalism today, specifically evangelicalism, it's hard not to conclude that the fundamentalists have assumed that they have lost. I think they have assumed they have lost because they are no longer debating us about the inerrancy of the Bible or the virgin birth or the bodily resurrection. They're no longer trying to ascertain and apprehend the truth of those fundamentals. Now, a great portion of them have embraced Christian nationalism, autocracy, and illiberalism in the effort to impose theocratic rule, not say what thus saith the Lord. I think they have acted out of a sense that they lost. They have found purchase with the denial of other truths. The truth of our belovedness as being made in the image of God. The truth of liberation. A liberation that the good news was promised, that promised to us. They have abandoned the truth of relationship, of peace, of love. The evangelical Russell Moore, who has been summarily dismissed from the leadership of the evangelical movement, lamented that even the articulation of God, of Jesus as a peace-loving, non-violent believer in love of all people is denied. So what word can we offer, preachers? And perhaps this is where Fosdick's famous sermon is helpful. Because ultimately, even though he does challenge the fundamentalist approach, that sermon is an encomium to love, tolerance, and liberty. Is there a truth bigger than our individual self-interest? Is there a truth bigger than our tribal loyalty? Is there a truth bigger than our ideological commitments? Is there a truth bigger than the mundane and profane of trying to win in the political battle? Is there a truth bigger? There are some truths that, even though they are contested, hold out the promise of not being denied and quite possibly being available for collective engagement and application in the world overrun by untruth. I'm thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King. The bigger truth was love. The bigger truth was nonviolence. And all of those who came after him, all those who attacked him, never ever made a substantive argument against love. They fought over legal questions, constitutional questions. They wanted to make sure that segregation was maintained. They wanted to make sure that black people were continued to be seen as inferior, but they never, ever were able to make a substantiated, well thought out attack and argument against love. There are bigger truths to which we can lay claim. I can see the preachers now. Preacher, I've been preaching love all this time. Preach it again. What about righteousness? What about dignity? What about covenant? What about liberty? What about democracy? Preacher, I've preached. No. There are bigger truths than the untruth that everybody can find purchase. The theologian Walter Brueggemann maintained in his book, Truth Speaks to Power, as shown in the contested truths Fosdick and Straighten fought mightily to assert, that we should not discount the power of multiple truths. The pharaonic truth of official state power that enslaved Israel is countered by the truth of a God who saw, heard, and knew the oppression of God's people and committed to liberating them from bondage. The imperial truth of the Pax Romana, which brought the kind of peace at the end of a spear, and in seemingly all-powerful domination system that adhered in the person of a Caesar, was countered by the truth of Jesus and his followers, living out God's reign of good news to the poor, release of the captives, freedom from the oppressed, and recovered sight to the blind. Whether correspondence or coherent, a great multitude of people saw the truth. And long after that death on a cross, Long after the discovery of that empty tomb, those people fanned out across the known world and told the truth of liberation from the bondage to sin. There are some bigger truths than the untruth. Brueggemann goes on to argue that the church and preachers must take seriously the postmodern context of ministry and propose, quote, a meeting of liturgy and proclamation, whereby people come to receive new materials or old materials freshly voiced, think Fosdick, that will fund, feed, nurture, nourish, legitimate, and authorize a counter-imagination of the world. Preachers, you are the person tasked with putting forth a counter-imagination, and you have truth in your toolkit to do it. I think we can do it. I'll say we have no choice but to do it. There is always a fresh wind of God blowing through, and we have a very, very powerful tool at our disposal. It is the truth. 6 years after that sermon, Fosdick wrote an article for Harper's Magazine. And I'll admit to you, I teach this in my preaching class more than I teach Shall the Fundamentalists Win. The article is, "What is the matter with preaching?" And I want us to remember also that this battle for truth, this use of truth, is not just your superpower or something I'm telling you to get, but it's something that Fosdick, I think, wanted preachers to remember, and what he remembered when he did give that famous sermon. He says in this article, nothing that the preacher says on any subject, however wise and important, matters much unless it makes at the beginning vital contact with the practical life and daily thinking of the audience. All those people, whether they call themselves MAGA or progressive, whether they hate the immigrant or an immigrant themselves, whether they voted for Trump or they voted for Harris, all of these people need a word from the Lord. And truth is the means by which we shall deliver it. May it be so.
We'll move around. So you just wave your hand, Pastor John or Janice will come with the mic.
So I was wondering if we live in a moment where the Christ in Christianity has been replaced by capitalism.
Oh. I will say it this way. I have always said, and I get in trouble with this, and I'm probably on record saying it again, I think Christianity is the handmaiden of white supremacy. And I know that may sound strange for someone who is a minister of the gospel. But that is a truth that I'm willing to face and name so that I can offer, as Brueggemann says, the counter-imagination. What I would say, though, is, and this I do say this very clearly in my ministry, what Christianity must do writ large, but what I want our church to do is to remember that in our sacred texts, we are Rome. And if you sit with that, it will change how you think about capitalism. It will change how you think about what we do, and it'll make you preach differently. Now, I'm not going to pretend that that is popular in any church I have served. And I have email upon email of countering this sort of approach that I have. But I am very clear that we are Rome. We are the empire, our imperial, and whether we use capitalism or any other system is immaterial. We are the head of a domination system that seeks to protect itself at all cost. And we will do that with whatever economic system or whatever government structure we need to do it. And if that is the case, then that reference to the gospel, the New Testament, then means that our work is a work of counter. It is a work of challenge. It is also a dangerous work. I hope I answered your question.
Hi there. I'm Lucas, a pastoral intern here at Augsburg. And one of the things that me and my young up-and-comer peers talk about a lot is that we're always told that we're going into a job where we're going to burn out, and that we're, going into places where we're either going to preach to the choir or preach to the void. And I can't help but notice you yourself are pivoting to politics right now. So how do you not get frustrated that you speak the truth, and then the truth is either heard by people who already know it or people who don't want to hear it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The way I'll answer this, and I hope it answers to a certain degree, because I want to tell you about my approach. And it's related to the first answer that I gave. What people may not know is that I, again, as Babette mentioned it, I was in politics before I went into ministry. And that's a long story, but I did not expect to go into ministry. I'll put it that way. That was not the plan. Politics was the plan. Ministry was not. But I think I am lucky to have not gone into ministry right away, is what I will start. In some sense, it gave me, it exposed me to systems and largeness that once I got to the church, I'm going to be honest, and again, this may not sound, some people may not like the way it sounds. I'm not invested in maintaining the Church of Jesus Christ as we know it. That is not the project to which I have enlisted. I have been very honest with the churches that I serve that is not my goal. I am not trying to protect what we have created. I'm not trying to protect the institution. I'm not interested in doing that. I don't think that is my task. And because that isn't my task, no, don't get me wrong. I'm a minister of a church, so I have to look at budgets. I have to look at what's going on, and yet, I know that is not what I am called to work for, and so I take every opportunity to, in some ways, just sort of a shorthand, this opportunity to go on the adventure of truth. What is it that I'm seeing? I work very hard at naming what is in its horror, in its frightening aspects. I want to name, and that, by the way, holds me in good stead in politics and in faith, because if we cannot name, if we cannot tell the truth, then we cannot husband the resources that we need to do what we are called to do. And that's for any institution, religious, political, or otherwise. I'm not burned out too because I am very fortunate. I learned, I went to Wesley Seminary, and Wesley had this wonderful way of organizing our lives in the Master Divinity program. If you were going into academics, you had a certain track. If you were going into pastoral ministry, you had another one. And in the pastoral ministry, you had all of your years there, something called the pastoral colloquy. And I was fortunate to have an ethicist, Sandra Willer. Some of you theologians may know who Sandra Willer is, an ethicist, who prevailed upon us to understand that we could not serve God's people if we were tired, angry, out of sorts, out of relationship, out of community. And so I set about then making sure that I'm surrounded by a kind of love and acceptance of family that I could not do any of what I'm doing. My husband is here today, and I cannot do any of this without someone who loves me unconditionally and carries me through for this work. So find your family. That is where you get protection. And just remember, if you are called to this, you are called to it no matter what is happening around you. So don't get invested in that. Get invested in the call.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Thank you. Could you comment a little bit about the media's reluctance to use the word lie and liar?
Yeah.
And maybe in doing so, riff on the Bible's vision of Satan as the father of lies?
Lies. I'll start with Father Satan lies. The pure genius of the biblical witness is it's very, and this is something that Fosdick, in that article, by the way, What is the Matter of Preaching, does a wonderful job of talking about how the Bible can be a partner with the preacher in a very real way. Because what Fosdick just could not stand the idea of us thinking that expounding on the Jebusites would give any person in 1920s any insight into what the life was like. So he took issue with the idea of not so much. It's funny. Some would think he was like Straden on this point. He wasn't dismissing critical inquiry of the Bible and that kind of work. But what he was getting at was that the Bible is pure genius in understanding the human condition, and the genius of the Bible is that lying. Was a destructive part of human expression. It could do many destructive things. So to personify it in the face of the devil and this metaphor of the father is very powerful to sort of, I think, emphasize the notion of how destructive lying can actually be. And that's worth us mining, I think. Again, I grew up in Black Pentecostalism, and the devil was a real character. And you had to, I had that experience at age 14 at a tent revival. We watched a movie called The Burning Hell, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I rushed up to get saved because the devil was just too much for me to handle. But that real work of this idea of how destructive lying is and what it can do to the pursuit of faith, of a relationship with God, is a very powerful element that I think it's worth us mining in our own context, even if we cannot abide this character of the devil. The media, again, this gets to the real something that I said in the lecture about the narratives that we have invested in. This country, and certainly if you look at what it is like to be a black man in this country, the narratives of black inferiority, black criminality, and black pathology that still attach to my existence. Those narratives were formed hundreds of years ago. There is also that narrative, and that narrative is very connected to the narrative of our exceptionalist origins of who we are. I really do believe that our field of journalism here has been shaped and socialized in that and is unaware or unable to do it. So to say that someone is lying when they have never done that it's so disorienting, I think, to the enterprise. I won't even get into, that's even before we get into the idea that they're all businesses and things like that. That's the one of the sort of easy, but I think there is a deeper issue here. That we are all shaped by these narratives. We are shaped by narratives of exceptionalism, narratives of goodness, narratives of innocence that will just shrink from the idea that a politician, that a president of the United States can be said to have lied. And only when we have done something more definitive, like try to impeach them, or certainly with Nixon, or that we found something after they've long been dead, can we then venture to say lie and break the hold of that narrative. But that is the project too. That is why untruth is so powerful too, because I'm thinking about Brueggemann's work on the prophets. Brueggemann said, we often look at the prophets, we thought we just look at them, but the reason the prophets were very unpopular, we have to look at the people. There are some truths, there are some narratives that you just can't hear. We can't hear it. We can't allow ourselves to hear it because it would require a shift that we just are not prepared to make. And so we are also saddled with this issue in this country, that there are some truths. We're just starting to do it. And this is not self-serving, it's actually true. In 2017, I made reference to it, in 2017, people said I was overreacting. You're just overreacting about everything. It also goes back to what you also know. I'm a political scientist by training, and I used to fight. My concentration in graduate school was American politics, voting behavior, voting psychology. I used to fight mightily with the theorists, because the theorists were always talking about how sublimely beautiful this democracy is. And I would reply, humans are humans. We do horrible things to each other. And they would say, oh, but the institutions and the look at the documents, how elegant. There are some truths that are so unbearable. And so when in 2017 I was saying that we can fall into autocracy, people, you get out of here. And even historical fact, Jim Crow segregation came after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. This country can backslide dramatically because some truths are just too unbearable for people to hear. And so the media are very much a part of that challenge. I think we have one more.
Could you comment on one other biblical text? 1 John, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us.
Yes.
The power of confession today
yes.
to achieve what you're talking about.
Right. That's and I'm laughing because Sometimes jokingly, but sometimes seriously, my father would say that to us. Look at you, telling lies, and the truth is not even in you. That's why I really push on the naming. You use the word confession because I think if you don't name a truth, if you don't name something, you certainly can't get to the point where you will confess it or you would admit it or you would. And so I do like that verse is an interesting one because I think it's something that I instinctively know, but even if not theologically know. But to me, that is the power of faith. If we can't name truth, then I don't know how are we different from any other institution, political, economic, or social. I know that runs the risk of sort of putting us, above everyone. But the project of faith and the project of a Christianity that inheres in the Jesus that got up in the middle of that synagogue and said that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. To name in that those things he names, he was naming the reality, a reality that they didn't want to hear. He was naming a reality that actually also could say that you're waiting on something to happen somewhere. It's somewhat. No, it is happening now. That was the truth. This is that naming I'm talking about. And so if you are unable to name, that's why I love that phrase, the truth is not in you. If you can't say it, if you can't do it. You remember after George Floyd was murdered, there was all this talk about the reckoning. And people put monikers on that. And what it was all about was, how about naming the things that we'd rather not know? That was also why, every time we saw the murder of an unarmed person, people would always want to know, what did they do? Why did, it didn't matter that, an expired license tag should not be a death sentence, but what did they do? What that was an inability to name something. If we are going to do this work, and by the way, this is not just to the people out there that you think are so, so mired in untruth. It's the people who are sitting in front of you, the people that you know, the members who come to you every day. The members who gave you this position to preach. We have to say a truth, unpopular truth. Because if we don't, then I don't know what we're doing. I get worried. I'll put it this way, I want to be careful. If no one in my church is annoyed or angry with me, I wonder, am I playing it safe? And don't get me wrong, and I have played it safe. I'm not going to, there are times where you're sitting like, I'm not going to say that. I have said, I'm not going to say that. I'm admitting it to you now. I don't want that fight. So I'm not. So that's a challenge for me, and I have to admit it, and I have to do it. And that's where. This thing about naming, I really push myself on it. And there's a lot of we debate this with preachers. Are you just doing it because you're trying to, you just want to get it off your chest? So, all those things are relevant questions. Are you doing it because you just, you want to say it? So I wrestle with all of that. But I do think there's something about naming it. And then if you're able to name it, then you can also admit and you can confess. But if you do it, you can also get people to confess. I mentioned Russell Moore. Russell Moore, which shouldn't have been a surprise to him, but Russell Moore, big evangelical. I had many run-ins with him when I worked for the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. But, you know, he came out with his book about a couple of years ago, and he was talking about just being so surprised that in the churches he went into, that people didn't want to hear about anymore about Jesus loving people. And it blew his mind. And he had to name it, and he named it, and he got kicked out. So some things you have to tell the truth. And he got and that book was his sort of confession. It was his confession to say, oh, this is what we did. This is what I was involved in, and this is the water I was carrying for for things other than the gospel, for things other than the truth.
We're going to take 15 minutes to let our lecturer transition into our preacher, although you've already been preaching for us today.
I know.
Yes. So 11:30, we'll start chapel. Feel free to get some coffee, use the restroom, mingle, and then be back to hear a good word from Reverend Davis. Let's give him one more.
Oh, thank you
sign
so
of our
much.
gratitude.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.